In the quiet village of Iziyama, there lived a woman named Amaka. Everyone in the village knew her name. She was beautiful, tall, and had a soft voice that people loved to hear. When she walked through the market, women turned to look, and men whispered that she was lucky to have a husband like Obinna. Amaka smiled whenever she heard those words. She liked the attention, the greetings, and the respect people gave her. But what most people also knew was that Amaka did not like to work. Her husband, Obinna, was a good man. He woke up early every morning even before the first rooster crowed. He went to the farm while the air was still cool and fog rested on the trees. He worked hard, planting and harvesting yams, cassava, and vegetables. When he returned home, tired and dusty, Amaka would still be sleeping or sitting under the mango tree chatting with neighbors. Sometimes she would be plaiting her hair or painting her nails. Obinna never shouted. He believed that love needed patience. But inside his heart grew heavy. He wished that his wife would help even a little. He wanted to come home to the smell of food or to see the compound swept clean. But every day was the same. If anyone asked Amaka why she didn't work, she would laugh and say, "A woman like me was not made for sweat." The women in the village shook their heads, but no one wanted to quarrel with her. She was polite and always smiling even when she refused to lift a finger. Life continued this way until one rainy season. Obinna went to the farm one morning even though dark clouds covered the sky. He needed to weed before the crops were spoiled by rain. By afternoon the storm came. It rained so heavily that the paths turned into small rivers. Obinna came home soaked, coughing, and weak. The next morning he could not get up. At first Amaka thought he was just tired. She made him hot water but didn't know what else to do. When the days passed and he did not recover, she began to worry. She had no idea how to farm and the little food they had started to finish. She went to the market, but without money she could not buy anything. The once cheerful woman began to feel fear. The compound that used to feel big and peaceful now felt lonely and quiet. She sat beside Obinna's bed, fanning him and whispering, "You will be fine, my husband." But her voice shook as she spoke. Hunger soon came knocking. The farm became overgrown because no one weeded. The goats began to wander away. Even her friends stopped visiting because they had their own work to do. Amaka spent long hours sitting alone, listening to the sound of the wind through the trees. One evening a neighbor named Nkechi came by. She looked at Amaka with pity. "You should at least fetch some firewood and cook porridge," she said. Amaka frowned. "I don't even know where to begin." Nkechi shook her head. "You must learn. Life does not wait for anyone." That night Amaka could not sleep. She kept thinking about her husband's weak body and how their farm was turning wild. She had never planted a single seed in her life. She looked at her soft palms and thought of Obinna's rough hands, the same hands that had fed her, built their home, and bought her fine clothes. She began to cry silently, afraid of what might happen if things did not change. By morning she decided to try. She took Obinna's hoe and walked to the farm. The path was muddy and she slipped several times. When she reached the farm, she stared at the tall grass covering the yams. The sun was hot and the sound of insects filled the air. Her heart beat fast and her hands shook as she lifted the hoe. She hit the ground once, twice, then stopped to breathe. It was harder than she thought. Her back began to ache and sweat rolled down her face. "How does he do this every day?" she whispered to herself. After a short while, she gave up and sat under a tree. Her arms hurt and her clothes were dirty. She looked around and felt both shame and anger, shame for never understanding Obinna's effort, and anger at herself for being so helpless. When she returned home, Obinna looked at her and smiled weakly. "You went to the farm?" he asked softly. She nodded and sat beside him. "I tried, but it's too hard." He coughed a little and said, "It's always hard at first. The land does not give to those who stand and look at it." His words stayed in her mind long after he fell asleep. For the first time, Amaka began to think about life differently. She realized that beauty and pride could not cook food or plant crops. She began to understand what the women in the village meant when they said, "A house without effort will one day go dark." The next day she woke early. She tied a wrapper around her waist and went out again. Her neighbors were surprised to see her carrying a basket. Some even laughed, thinking she wouldn't last a day. But this time Amaka didn't care. She remembered Obinna's words and began to work. Her first few strokes were clumsy, but she kept going. She felt pain in every muscle, but something new also grew inside her, a small fire of determination. As the sun set, she looked at the small piece of land she had cleared. It wasn't much, but it was hers. When she came home, tired and covered in dust, she smiled for the first time in many days. She cooked porridge using the few yams left and shared it with Obinna. He looked at her and said, "You are stronger than you think." Amaka did not reply. She only nodded, knowing that her life was beginning to change, one handful of soil at a time. The next morning the sound of roosters filled the air, but Amaka was already awake. She had not slept much. Mama Igioma's words kept echoing in her mind, "Even soft hands can grow strong when the belly is empty." When the first light of dawn touched the sky, she tied her wrapper tightly and walked to the old woman's farm. The path was quiet and the morning air was cool. As she walked, she saw other women carrying baskets, singing softly as they headed to their own fields. She looked at them and felt something new, a mix of fear and courage. When she reached Mama Igioma's farm, the old woman was already there, bending over her rows of cassava. Her back was straight, and her hands moved with strength that surprised Amaka. She looked up, smiled and said, "Ah, you came." Amaka nodded shyly. "Yes, Mama. I don't know what to do, but I will try." Mama Igioma handed her a hoe. "Start here. Dig small holes one after another. Don't rush. The land is not like pride." Amaka took the hoe and began. The ground was hard and her arms ached almost immediately. Sweat rolled down her face and the sun climbed higher. She wanted to stop, but when she looked at the old woman, still working steadily without complaint, she forced herself to continue. By noon her back hurt so badly she almost cried. She dropped the hoe and sat on the ground. "Mama, how do you do this every day?" she asked weakly. Mama Igioma chuckled. "My child, the body learns what the heart desires. You have lived a soft life, but that is not a curse. You can still change. Hunger will teach you faster than any teacher." Those words sank deep into Amaka's heart. She looked at her hands, which were already covered in small blisters, and realized that maybe for the first time she was truly learning something important. When evening came, Mama Igioma gave her a small basket of cassava and vegetables. "Take this," she said. "You have earned your meal today." Amaka's eyes widened. "You mean, I can take this home?" "Of course," the old woman said with a gentle smile. "That is how the world works. You plant, you water, you wait, and then you eat. Nothing good comes from doing nothing." Amaka thanked her and carried the basket home. Her arms were sore, but her heart felt lighter. For the first time in a long while, she had brought food home with her own hands. Obina was still weak when she arrived, but he smiled when he saw her. "Where did you get this?" he asked softly. "I worked for it," she said proudly. "Mama Igioma helped me." He looked at her, and his eyes filled with quiet pride. "You have done well, Amaka," he whispered. "You are stronger than you think." That night they ate together in silence. The food tasted simple, but to Amaka, it was sweeter than any feast she had ever had. Every bite reminded her of the sweat she had shed under the sun, and of the lesson that nothing in life comes easily. The next morning she woke up sore all over, but she pushed herself to get up. The old Amaka would have stayed in bed and complained. The new Amaka tied her wrapper and went back to the farm. Mama Igioma was waiting, smiling when she saw her. "I knew you would return," she said. Each day after that, Amaka worked beside the old woman. At first she moved slowly, but with time she became stronger. Her hands grew rough, her skin darker from the sun, but she no longer cared. She learned how to plant cassava, how to weed properly, and how to harvest ripe maize. Sometimes she would stop and look at Mama Igioma, amazed at her energy. "Mama, you never get tired," she said one day. The old woman laughed softly. "My child, when you work with purpose, your strength multiplies. It is not the body that keeps you going, it is the heart." Those words stayed with Amaka. She realized that her whole life she had mistaken comfort for happiness. She had thought that doing nothing would make her feel free, but now she knew the truth. Freedom came from being useful, from doing something that mattered. Weeks passed and the farm began to flourish. The crops grew strong and Amaka's spirit grew with them. The villagers started noticing the change. They saw her walking early in the morning with her basket and hoe, her once soft hands now firm and steady. Some women whispered, "Can that be Amaka? The one who said she wasn't made for sweat?" Others nodded in surprise. People do change when life teaches them. When she went to the market again, the traders didn't laugh this time. They greeted her warmly. "Ah, Amaka, you look different. Are you farming now?" "Yes," she said proudly. "And it feels good to work for what I eat." They smiled and gave her fair prices for her small harvest. One woman even said, "You see, when a woman stands up for her home, even the gods smile." Amaka carried her basket of food home, her heart full of gratitude. Obina was getting better now, his strength slowly returning. He watched her come in with her goods and said, "You look happy, my wife." I am, she replied softly. I used to think beauty was in resting. But now I know it is in doing. She told him stories of her days with Mama Ijeoma, of how the old woman worked with laughter and wisdom. She says that the earth listens when we touch it with care, Amaka said. Obinna smiled and nodded. That woman is right. The land rewards those who respect it. From then on, Amaka continued to work every day. Even when Obinna recovered, she did not stop. She still went to the farm, fetched water, and cooked meals with joy. Her laughter returned, not the careless laughter of before, but one filled with peace and pride. One evening, as the sun set over the village, Amaka sat outside her house, watching children play. Mama Ijeoma walked by, carrying a small bundle of firewood. Amaka ran to help her. Mama, let me carry that for you, she said. The old woman smiled. Ah, you see? Your hands have become strong indeed. Amaka laughed, remembering her old words. A woman like me was not made for sweat. Now she understood how wrong she had been. Sweat was not shameful, it was proof of strength, proof of love, and proof of change. That night, as she lay beside her husband, listening to the quiet hum of the night, she whispered, "Thank you, God, for teaching me before it was too late." Her journey had just begun, but she already knew, the woman she used to be was gone forever. The morning sun rose slowly over the village, painting the fields gold. Amaka walked behind Mama Ijeoma, carrying a small basket and an old hoe. Her body was still sore from the previous day, but she said nothing. Deep inside, something had changed. She wanted to learn. When they reached the farm, Mama Ijeoma pointed toward a corner of the field. "Today you will clear this part," she said. "It is small, but it will test your patience." Amaka sighed quietly. The soil looked dry and heavy. She gripped the hoe and began. The first few swings were weak. The blade hit the ground and bounced off. Sweat rolled down her neck and her arms burned. After a few minutes, she dropped the hoe and said, "Mama, I can't do this. My body is not made for this kind of work." Mama Ijeoma laughed gently. "Ah, my daughter," she said, "you sound just like the soil before the rain, hard and unwilling. But when the rain comes, it softens. You can do it. The ground only respects effort." Her voice carried calm wisdom, and Amaka felt ashamed of her own words. She picked up the hoe again and began to dig, slower but steadier this time. Her back ached and blisters formed on her palms, but she kept going. She thought of her husband, weak at home, and of the empty pots in their kitchen. That thought gave her strength. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, and the heat pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. Mama Ijeoma moved beside her, humming an old song as she worked. The rhythm of the song seemed to match the rhythm of the hoe hitting the earth. It gave Amaka comfort, reminding her that she was not alone in her struggle. When evening finally came, the small patch of land was cleared. It was not perfect, but it was hers, the result of her own hands. She stood and looked at it with pride. For the first time in her life, she felt the quiet satisfaction that came from working hard. Mama Ijeoma smiled and handed her a roasted maize. "Eat," she said. "It tastes better when your hands earn it." Amaka took a bite. The maize was warm and smoky, and the taste filled her heart more than her stomach. She nodded and said softly, "You are right, Mama. It really does taste better." The old woman smiled again. "That is how life works. When you earn something, you value it more. Tomorrow you will come again." Amaka hesitated but then nodded. "I will come," she said. And she did. The next day she arrived earlier, before the sun was fully awake. The air was cool and the sound of birds filled the trees. She began to work without waiting for Mama Ijeoma to tell her what to do. Her hands were rough, her muscles sore, but her spirit was lighter. Each day brought a new lesson. She learned how to plant cassava and yam, how to water the crops properly, and how to remove weeds without hurting the roots. At first she complained about the pain, but over time she began to see the beauty in it. One afternoon, as she rested under a mango tree, she looked at her hands. The blisters had turned into calluses. They were no longer soft and smooth like before, but she smiled. "These are the hands of a woman who works," she whispered to herself. Mama Ijeoma joined her and sat beside her. "You see," she said, "you are becoming strong. The land rewards those who do not give up." Amaka nodded slowly. "I used to think hard work was for poor people. But now I see it makes people rich, not in money but in peace." Mama Ijeoma chuckled. "You have learned quickly. A lazy person sees only the pain of work, but a wise person sees its harvest." As weeks passed, the little patch of land Amaka worked began to grow green. Cassava leaves spread wide and yam vines climbed upward. She felt a deep pride each time she walked past the farm. Sometimes the other women in the village would stop and stare. "Is that Amaka?" they would whisper. "The one who used to sleep all day?" "Yes," another would reply. "The same one. Maybe the gods have touched her heart." Amaka heard the whispers, but she did not mind. They gave her more strength to continue. At home, Obinna was slowly getting better. Each evening, Amaka cooked meals with the food she earned. When she served him roasted maize or yam porridge, he smiled and said, "You are working too hard, my wife." She laughed softly. "Not hard enough. I am only beginning." Sometimes she would tell him stories from the farm, about the stubborn weeds, about the snake that hid among the yam mounds, or about how Mama Ijeoma could work all day without a single complaint. Obinna would laugh and shake his head. "That old woman has taught you more than I ever could," he said. Amaka agreed. "She is like the earth, quiet, patient, and full of lessons." One day, rain began to fall heavily while they worked. Amaka looked up at the sky, her face wet with both rain and sweat. She laughed, spinning slowly with joy. "Look, Mama. The rain is helping us." Mama Ijeoma nodded. "Yes, the rain always comes to those who wait and work. It blesses effort, not idleness." Amaka thought about her old life, the long hours spent sleeping, gossiping, and waiting for her husband to do everything. She felt ashamed but also thankful. The farm had changed her. It had shown her that strength was not something people were born with, it was something they built through effort. As the weeks turned into months, her small field grew bigger. Other women began to join her, asking for advice. "Amaka, how do you keep the weeds from returning?" one asked. She smiled. "By waking up before they do." They all laughed, and for the first time she felt proud, not for her looks or her beauty but for her work. At the end of harvest season, Mama Ijeoma invited her to the edge of the field. "Do you remember the first day you came here?" she asked. Amaka nodded. "Yes. I said I couldn't do it. And now?" Amaka looked at the full baskets of cassava and yam around them. Her heart swelled. "Now, I know I can do anything if I try." The old woman smiled and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then you have learned the true lesson of life. Work is not a punishment, my child. It is a gift. The ground gives only to those who ask with sweat." That evening, as Amaka walked home carrying her basket, the setting sun painted the path golden. Each step felt lighter than the one before. She no longer saw herself as a helpless woman. She was a worker, a provider, and a wife with pride in her own strength. When she reached home, Obinna was waiting by the door. She showed him the harvest, and his eyes filled with tears. "You have changed, Amaka," he said softly. She smiled and nodded. "I had to," she said. "Life gave me no choice, and I'm glad it didn't." That night, she slept deeply, her body tired but her heart at peace. The sound of crickets filled the air, and in her dreams she saw the earth, soft, fertile, and alive, whispering back to her, "You have finally learned to grow." The afternoon sun rested gently over the fields as Amaka wiped the sweat from her forehead. The crops were growing well, and her heart swelled with quiet pride. She had come far from the woman she used to be, the one who feared dirt, who believed work was beneath her. Now the sound of a hoe striking soil was her favorite kind of music. As she bent to pull out some weeds, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning around, she saw a tall young man carrying a bundle of tools. He had a bright smile, his face glowing with the warmth of the sun. "You must be Amaka," he said, setting the tools down. "Auntie Ijeoma told me about you." Amaka nodded politely, brushing dust off her wrapper. "And you are?" "I'm Chinyu," he replied. "Mama Ijeoma's nephew. I came from Nui to help her with the farm for some time." She smiled faintly. "Welcome. The farm could use more hands." He chuckled, glancing at her calloused palms. "Ah, I see you already have strong hands. Hard to believe this is the same woman Auntie Ijeoma called a soft-handed learner." Amaka laughed, the sound light and genuine. "Don't tease me," she said. "I'm still learning, but the ground is a strict teacher." From that day they began to work side by side. Chinyu was quick with his hands and quicker with his jokes. He made even the hardest task seem easier. When the sun was harsh, he would shade her with a palm leaf and say, "Even the strongest farmers need a little breeze." She would roll her eyes, pretending to be annoyed, but his kindness made her smile. Mama Ijeoma watched them often from afar, shaking her head with a knowing grin. "Work can build more than crops," she murmured. Amaka didn't understand what she meant at first. To her, Chinyu was just a friend. Someone who reminded her that labor could be joyful, not just tiring. But slowly she began to notice small things. The way he encouraged her without mocking, the way he respected her silence, The way his laughter made even long days feel short. One morning as they harvested cassava together, Chinyu said, "You know, Amaka, I've heard many stories about you." "Oh?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. "What kind of stories?" He grinned mischievously. "They said you were the laziest woman in Izayama. That your husband did everything while you rested like a queen." Amaka laughed, shaking her head. "Those stories were true. I used to think work was punishment. But now I see it's what keeps a person alive." He nodded thoughtfully. "Yes. The earth doesn't reward words, only effort. I like how you've changed. Not many people can face their own weakness and fight it." His words stayed with her long after that day. She realized she no longer worked just to survive. She worked because it made her feel strong and capable. When Obinna finally recovered from his illness, he decided to visit the farm for the first time since he fell sick. As he walked down the dusty path, he expected to find the same wife he had left months ago, idle, complaining, and unwilling to lift a finger. But when he reached the field, he stopped in shock. There she was, Amaka, bending over the soil, her back glistening with sweat, her arms strong and steady. She laughed as Chinyu helped her lift a basket full of cassava. Her face glowed with pride and life. For a moment, Obinna just stood there, unable to speak. When she finally noticed him, she froze for a second, then smiled. "You're here," she said, rushing to meet him. "Look at what we've grown." He looked around at the thriving crops, then at his wife. "Amaka," he said softly, his voice filled with disbelief and admiration, "you have changed." She nodded, wiping her hands on her wrapper. "I had to," she said. "The earth doesn't listen to excuses." Chinyu came forward and greeted Obinna warmly. "Your wife is one of the hardest workers here," he said with a grin. "Even Mama Ijeoma can't keep up sometimes." Obinna smiled, still amazed. "Thank you for helping her," he said sincerely. After that day, Obinna began joining them on the farm when he felt strong enough. Together, the three of them worked from morning till sunset. The land flourished and so did their friendship. One evening, as the sun painted the sky orange, Amaka sat beside Obinna under a tree. She watched the golden light fall over the crops, the same one she had once thought she could never grow. Obinna looked at her and said, "I prayed for my health to return, but I did not know God was also healing our home through your hands." She smiled gently. "Maybe sickness wasn't our curse, maybe it was our teacher." He nodded. "And you, my wife, were brave enough to learn." Amaka turned her gaze to the field where Chinyu was still working. "He helped too," she said softly. "He reminded me that strength isn't something you're born with. It's something the earth gives you when you stop fearing it." Obinna placed his hand over hers. "And now you have met your match." Amaka tilted her head, smiling. "My match?" "Yes," he said with a chuckle. "The earth, it challenges you, humbles you, and rewards you. Just like a good husband." She laughed, her eyes bright with gratitude. "Then I will never stop working because the earth and I understand each other now." That night as they walked home, the village children ran past, shouting, "Amaka the farmer." The name made her laugh, but deep inside, it warmed her heart. She was no longer the lazy wife who refused to lift a finger. She was a woman who had faced her weakness and conquered it. The earth had become her match, not because it was hard but because it demanded her best. And she had finally learned to give it. The morning breeze carried the smell of wet soil and growing crops through the village of Izayama. Amaka woke before the sun, tying her wrapper firmly as she stepped outside. The sound of birds greeted her, and beside the small hut, Obinna was already waiting, a hoe resting on his shoulder. She smiled. "Let's begin early today. The rain came last night, the ground will be soft." Obinna looked at her, half amused, half proud. "You have become the one waking me up now. Who would have believed it?" Amaka laughed. "Even the lazy learn when hunger teaches them." Together they walked to the farm. The path that once felt long and tiring now seemed like part of their daily joy. The fields, once dry and neglected, were green again. Rows of yam, cassava, and maize stretched out before them, strong and full of life. Every plant felt like a testimony, not just of hard work but of change. As they worked, the villagers passed by and waved. Some still whispered, others smiled openly. "Is that Amaka? The same woman who wouldn't fetch water?" One man said in disbelief. "Now she works harder than anyone in Izayama." By midday, Obinna sat under a tree wiping his forehead. He watched his wife move gracefully through the field, her hands steady and confident. "You know," he said softly, "our harvest will be the best this year." Amaka nodded. "It will. The earth rewards hands that respect it." When the harvest finally came, it was indeed the best in the village. Their barn overflowed with yams, and their baskets could not hold all the cassava. Even the market women who once mocked Amaka for begging came to buy from her. They shook their heads in amazement, saying, "Truly no one can say people do not change." During the village festival, when everyone gathered to celebrate the new harvest, the elders called Amaka and Obinna forward. The oldest among them, Chief Nana, spoke in a proud voice. "This year's best farmers are a couple who remind us that hard work can transform even the laziest hands. Let us honor Obinna and Amaka of Iziama." The crowd clapped and cheered. Amaka felt tears fill her eyes as she stepped forward. She remembered how far she had come, from the days she refused to cook or fetch water, to this moment when the entire village celebrated her work. When they handed her the basket of yam as a symbol of honor, she bowed her head slightly and said, "I thank you. I have learned that comfort without effort brings shame, but work brings peace." That evening when the celebration ended, Amaka sat outside her home, the sky glowing orange as the sun began to set. The laughter from the festival echoed in the distance. Obinna sat beside her, handing her roasted corn. "You've changed everything," he said quietly. "Even the neighbors come to you for advice now." Amaka smiled. "Change came when I stopped running from effort. I used to think rest was happiness, but now I know peace comes from purpose." She watched as young women from the village passed by, chatting and laughing. Some waved at her and one called out, "Mama Amaka, teach us how to plant like you." Amaka's heart swelled with pride. "Come tomorrow," she called back. "We'll start with cassava stems." And they did. The next morning, 3 young women joined her on the farm. At first they complained about the heat, the dirt, and the ache in their backs, just as Amaka once had. But she encouraged them, telling stories as they worked, laughing through their struggles. "You will see," she said, "when you eat from what your hands grow, it will taste sweeter than anything bought." Soon more women began to join her. Some wanted to learn how to plant, others how to cook or trade at the market. Amaka never refused anyone. She told them, "Every woman has strength, but it sleeps until she wakes it." One day Mama Igioma visited the farm again. She leaned on her walking stick and smiled as she watched Amaka lead the women. "My daughter," she said, "you have become what the village needed, a teacher of strength." Amaka knelt to greet her warmly. "Mama, it was your hands that started mine. I only followed your steps." Mama Igioma chuckled. "You didn't just follow, you walked farther than I ever did. That is what makes a true student." Amaka laughed softly, but her eyes shone with gratitude. When the next season came, Iziama became known for its rich harvests. Traders from nearby villages visited to buy yams and vegetables. People came not just for food but for lessons. They said, "Go to Amaka's farm. You will learn how to work, and how to live." Life at home also grew brighter. Amaka and Obinna no longer worried about food or money. Their farm provided enough for them to sell and still share with others. Some evenings they invited children from the village to eat roasted yam by the fire. Amaka would tell them stories of her past, the days when she refused to lift a finger. The children listened wide-eyed and she always ended with the same words, "No one is too fine to work. A woman who knows how to use her hands will never go hungry." Obinna would laugh and add, "And a husband with such a wife will never lack joy." Their laughter filled the air, warm and full of love. Years later, when people spoke of Amaka, they no longer called her lazy. They called her Amaka the Wise. Her story became one parents told their children, a reminder that pride without effort leads to shame, but humility and work bring honor. Sometimes, when she sat alone under the big tree near the farm, she would look at her hands, once smooth and soft, now strong and full of life. She would smile to herself and whisper, "These hands have built a life I can be proud of." The earth had taught her well, and she had become its best student.